I made a couple of videos previously about basic settings and how to use the Canon A1 film camera. This video takes the process one step further and deals with using the Canon A1 in the real world. The video is based on this camera, and although some aspects of the video are specific to the Canon A1, the exposure concepts apply to all cameras, both film and digital. The first thing I'm going to say is very specific to the A1. The camera was a technological tour de force when it was released in 1978 and had unique functionality that no other camera had back then. However, the A1 had an Achilles heel. Not only was the center-weighted average metering system fixed with no other metering options, but it was also inaccurate. It overexposes by quite a lot. When I later acquired a Canon T90 and used it with the same lenses and film that I used with the A1, I got much better photos. But this shouldn't be the case with a film camera. If you're focusing light through the same lens and exposing the light onto the same film, image quality should be exactly the same, but it wasn't. When I realised what was happening, I did some controlled testing using center-weighted average metering mode on the T90, and the results quite shocked me. The difference in meter readings between the Canon A1 and the Canon T90 was consistently 1 1/3 to 1 2/3 f-stops, with the A1 overexposing. Now, this may be a problem with this particular camera, but many years ago my brother also had an A1 and he also complained about overexposure. For a while he worked as an engineer servicing automatic film processing machines, and he understood exposure. I've also seen mentions online about the A1 overexposing. For this reason, I would suggest winding in some negative exposure compensation to counter the overexposure problem. However, before going out on an important photo shoot, you should always do your own testing first to make sure that your camera is set up correctly. To change the exposure compensation on the A1, just press in this little button and then turn the outside dial. The numbers on the dial are a little confusing. The half setting means that metering will be adjusted for half the light, or -1 f-stop. Each full f-stop represents a doubling or halving of light. The dial can be adjusted in 1/3 f-stop increments, and I will set mine to -1 1/3 f-stops. Hopefully you can see that on the video. Now that the camera is set up, let's take some photos. And our first photo is a portrait. For these photos, I wanted to maintain a very shallow depth of field to increase the bokeh effect. What I mean by this is that I want my subject to be in focus, but I want the background to be out of focus. There are two reasons for this. I want the viewer's eye to be drawn to the subject, so I don't want any distracting detail in the background. Also, with the background blurred to oblivion, it makes an attractive canvas for the subject. Use a long lens. For these photos, I use my Canon FD 70-210mm f4 at the maximum focal length, and use a large aperture. The diaphragm inside the lens controls the aperture, and large apertures, which have small f-stop numbers, give a narrower depth of field. What I'm going to do is put the camera into aperture priority, AV mode, and then set the aperture to the lens's maximum aperture. So use this little lever here to select AV mode. Then you'll see a yellow dial inside, and then use the dial to select f4, which is this lens's maximum aperture. This ensures I will use the lens's maximum aperture for the shot, and depending how much light is coming through the lens, the camera will set the shutter speed automatically. For some shots, you may want a deep depth of field so that near and distant objects in your frame are all in focus. Use a wide lens and set a small aperture, which is a larger f-stop number, such as f16 or f22. The minimum aperture for this 28mm lens is f22. Bear in mind that with a small aperture letting less light into the lens, the camera will need to use a longer shutter speed. If you're hand holding the camera and the shutter speed is too slow, this will result in blurry images. While setting your camera, keep an eye on the shutter speed. Lenses from this era don't have fancy image stabilization, and any blur from camera shake will ruin your image. The rule of thumb is that when hand holding your camera, the minimum shutter speed should be the reciprocal of the lens focal length. For example, when hand holding a 200mm lens, you should use a shutter speed of 1/200th of a second or faster. The alternative will be to use a tripod, monopod, or something else to help stabilize the camera. Unlike digital cameras, which have sensors whose sensitivity can be changed from shot to shot, the sensitivity of a roll of film is fixed. You could rewind a partly exposed roll of film and replace it with more sensitive film, but this is a lot of messing around. It is also possible to push film, which is exposing film at a different ISO to what it is rated, but this needs cooperation from your processing lab, and these days many labs may not be familiar with the process. The next shot is a panning shot. Using a slow shutter speed, I'm going to follow a moving object with my camera to deliberately create motion blur. Due to the fact I'm following my subject, the subject should have relatively less motion blur than the static background. This means that the main subject should be blurred slightly, but the background should be very blurred, thus giving the appearance of motion. I've found that a shutter speed of 1/15th of a second works quite well. If the shutter speed is too slow, everything will be blurred too much, and if it is too fast, it will freeze the action and not give the desired effect. To do this, I could set up the camera fully manually, but there is little point. For this shot, I will select shutter speed priority, TV mode, and then select the 1/15th shutter speed that I wish to use. So again, just use this little lever here, move over to TV, then you'll see a list of the shutter speeds, and then move this to 15, and that gives 1/15th of a second. Depending on the amount of light coming through the lens, when I release the shutter, the camera will automatically select the correct aperture. Be careful not to overexpose the shot. Using long shutter speeds will allow a lot of light into the camera, and the camera will select a small aperture to compensate. If there's too much light, the lens's minimum aperture may not be small enough and the shot will be overexposed. Panning takes some practice. Brace yourself, rotate as smoothly as possible, and try to keep the subject in the same part of the viewfinder as you release the shutter. Now that we've used both semi-automatic modes, aperture priority and shutter speed priority, let's go into fully automatic mode. Over the years, I've read comments to the effect that good photographers don't use fully automatic mode. This is nonsense. If the lighting conditions are good, fully automatic mode is fine, and it will give you good results. It will allow you to concentrate on your composition and what is happening around you without having to think about exposure adjustments all the time. All you need to do is to put the camera into shutter speed priority mode, that's TV, and then select P using the dial. It's a green P. As is also the case with the semi-automatic modes, you also need to ensure that the lens aperture ring is set to A. If it's not, then the semi-automatic modes and the fully automatic modes won't work because the camera won't be able to control the aperture in the lens. Compared to digital cameras, you need to use a little more caution with film cameras when using fully automatic mode because the film sensitivity is fixed. When the light starts to get low and the lens is already at its maximum aperture, the camera will start to select very slow shutter speeds, and if you are hand holding, this will result in blurry photos. Next is fully manual mode. I don't tend to use fully manual mode too often, apart from when I'm doing flash photography. Use manual mode when the lighting conditions are such that you think the camera's metering system will be fooled and won't be able to expose properly, or when you want to get a special effect that is outside the range of normal exposure. When I'm doing flash photography, I will sometimes set the camera in fully manual mode to expose the background correctly. I will then rely on the flash unit's feedback system to expose the subject correctly. With modern cameras, this is done using through the lens metering. With the Canon A1 and its dedicated flash, the Canon 199A, it is done using a light sensor on the front of the flash. When using fully manual mode, put the camera into shutter speed priority, that's the TV mode, using this lever. And then using the dial at the front, select the desired shutter speed. For the aperture, you need to use the aperture ring on the lens, and you need to set it away from the A. So push in this little button and then turn the ring to select your desired aperture. And this will vary from lens to lens. So on this lens, the aperture range is f2.8 to f22. Be aware that in fully manual mode, the viewfinder LCD will show the aperture that will give the correct exposure for the shutter speed that you have chosen, not the aperture you have selected on the lens. This confuses a lot of people, and the question gets asked a lot in comments on my previous videos. Now I'll talk about using the A1 with a flash unit. Back in the film days, camera bodies had dedicated flash units, and the dedicated flash for the Canon A1 was the Canon 199A. This is an old flash that doesn't use through the lens metering. In the comments section on other videos, people ask me if they can use this flash or that flash with the A1, and I really don't know. Maybe you can, or maybe you can't. If you have an A1 and you want to add a flash unit, I would strongly recommend getting hold of a 199A. Elsewhere on my channel you can find a video about the 199A, but in this video I will just describe the basic operations. Using this dial, make sure that the ASA or ISO setting on the flash matches the setting on the camera, and both should match the ISO rating of the film being used. Also ensure that the lens aperture ring is set to A. Mount the flash on the camera securely and lock the lever. It doesn't matter if the camera is in AV or TV mode. The camera will automatically set the shutter speed to 1/60th of a second, and the flash unit will control the lens aperture. Try to assess how far away your subject is in feet or meters, and look on the flash dial to see whether this distance is in the yellow, green or red range. Let's look at a couple of examples. So if it's 2 meters away, it's in all three ranges, yellow, green and red. If it's 10 meters away, it's only in the red range. Set this button on the flash to yellow, green or red accordingly. So for example, if the subject is 10 meters away in the red range, this has to be set to the red setting. For subjects further away, the camera will select a larger aperture in order to let more light through the lens. Obviously we need to turn the flash on, and when we do so, we need to wait until the pilot light is on or flashing to show that the flash is ready to fire. When the pilot light comes on, just focus the camera and release the shutter. The flash technology is quite crude from this era, but it will illuminate objects at night and provide fill flash during the daytime. It may sound contradictory, but I tend to use flash more during the daytime than I do at night. When shooting against bright backgrounds, your subject will be underexposed, and this can be fixed with some fill flash. Try to avoid taking photos like this one. Now I'll take a look at the shutter release self-timer. The obvious application for a self-timer is selfies, because you can't be behind and in front of the camera at the same time. However, despite using my A1 for over 40 years, the number of selfies I've taken can be counted on one hand. Here's one of those very rare photos. I tend to use the self-timer more for macro and slow shutter speeds when I'm concerned that pushing the shutter button may cause camera shake. Set your camera up on a tripod or a wall or something. These tabletop tripods can be quite useful at times. Wind the film and then turn this lever to either the 2 or 10-second position, then press the shutter button. This little red LED on the top will start to flash to indicate that the self-timer is in operation. With the 10-second delay, it will flash slowly at first and then start to flash rapidly just before the shutter is released. Without your eye pressed against the viewfinder, it's possible in self-timer mode that some stray light could enter the camera through the viewfinder and affect the exposure. To prevent this from happening, the eyepiece shutter can be closed using this little lever just to the left of the viewfinder. Also, if you have a problem where you look through the viewfinder and can't see anything, it could be because this lever is in the wrong position and the viewfinder is actually closed. If you've already pressed the shutter release button and then wish to cancel the self-timer, you can do so by moving the main switch to the L position, that's this one, back to L, or you can press the battery check button. So let's just do that. So I'll put it on the 10-second delay. It's wound on. When I press the shutter release button, we should see the LED start to flash, and then I'll cancel it using the battery test button. So you now see the LED flashing. Press this button and it's cancelled. The next feature I'm going to cover is one that I've never used personally, but occasionally I get asked questions. The A1 can expose multiple images on the same film frame. My photography style is more suited to documentary and travel rather than special effects, and I've never found a need for multiple exposures. However, your style may be different. When you pull the advance lever, this one here, it does two things. It cocks the shutter so that the shutter is ready to fire, and it also advances the film to the next frame. However, if you push in this little lever just underneath the advance lever and then pull the advance lever again, it only cocks the shutter. It doesn't advance the film. It leaves it on the same frame as the last shot. You can do this however many times you wish, and every exposure will be on the same frame of film. Obviously, you need to consider exposure because multiple exposures on the same piece of film will overexpose the film. It makes sense with multiple exposures to underexpose each exposure, but I have no experience with this and it will require some experimentation. With this feature, you can let your imagination run wild. You could photograph yourself sitting on different sides of a park bench at the same time, or include objects in the frame that weren't there originally. It's a very useful feature if you're into creative photography. If you have any comments, questions or other feedback, please leave them below. Thank you for watching and more videos soon.